Hi, Jim. Oh,
Howdy, Jason.
the chat is going already nuts.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Sometimes
saying you're late.
well, exactly. Well, we were not late. We're just sharing notes before we're doing pre-show
Yeah,
notes. It's
right, I see.
good to see everyone here. Jim, we're here. It feels like the broken record is still broken, and the song
Right.
remains the same. Ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire. Will there be a ceasefire? How will there be a ceasefire? Will there be a ceasefire? Won't there be a ceasefire? Oh my goodness, ceasefire. There won't be a ceasefire. Reports now out of Russia. Russia, of course, Putin offered a 3-day ceasefire to President Zelensky of Ukraine over the March 9th Victory Day, where, of course, many other foreign leaders will be in attendance. This is the victory over the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany in World War II, which Ukraine was part of at the time. So, yay, Ukraine. But Zelensky said, no, will not be partaking in the ceasefire in advance. So we'll see the responses, but apparently the ceasefire wasn't being met with a lot of praise from Russian generals. As the war wages on, Russia is still making advances, still making gains, mostly through small towns. I haven't seen any reports of any major territories taken, although Chasiv Yar, the lineup in Chasiv Yar seems to be deteriorating quite quickly. And by reports, if we're going to go with the intel, Ukraine had put a lot of its main troops on the Chasiv Yar defensive line. Ukraine still seems to be pulling up more and more troops. I think it's a countdown until they do full mobilization of everyone 18 and above, which will be disastrous.
Do you think they can pull that off?
I think they'll have to. I don't think.
I mean, can they actually succeed in forcing that age cohort into the military?
I mean, if it just comes down to roundup squads, I guess the question is, do they have enough men left to do roundup squads to get the last remaining men onto the front lines? That's a good question.
That's what you call a paradox, huh?
Yeah, exactly. How many Ukrainians do you need to forcibly recruit other Ukrainians into the war effort? I don't know. We're going to find out. I think, because I think if this continues into the summer, they're going to have to do something. And I don't think we're going to see European boots on the ground. I think that's the coalition of the willing has been shelved because they couldn't get anyone else other than UK and France to sign up to it. Not even Poland decided not to really give any promissory notes. So we shall see. But as it stands, it looks like Russia has basically said "niet" to the Kellogg plan, which is not surprising. Witkoff.
Although they, as I recall, they used a very gentle expression about it. Something that there would have to be substantial modifications or something like that. Something indicating that we can talk about it, but it's all wrong.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, I forget the exact wording, but I think it came down to something more like, okay, well, look, there's at least we're here. It's nice to see you at the table. Would you like a poppy seed roll? They're very nice. No? Coffee? No? Okay. Well, this thing you proposed, no. But we're open for other possibilities. I mean, Putin has now said that he of course is always available for unconditional negotiations, peace negotiations with President Zelensky. Just give him a call. I found the unconditional part very interesting. I mean, this is in direct response to Zelensky making a lot of conditions to the peace process. They're saying that there has to be a ceasefire before there's a peace process, which is, again, cart before the horse. Who knows why? But Zelensky, so Putin's, I think, responding directly to that. But I also think, because Putin likes to play little word games here, I also think that if they were to get into a unconditional peace process, it would also lead to the unconditional surrender of Ukraine.
Well, and I believe Peskov said something to the effect that the question was raised, what about the fact that Russia considered Zelensky illegitimate, that he's no longer the president of Ukraine? And he basically said something to the effect that, well, that's true. But on the other hand, got to deal with the hand you're dealt, and that's what's in Kiev right now. So we'll have to make that a sort of a working way to proceed. I think the other thing going on here too is it just occurred to me is that if Trump and Marco Rubio and the rest of them are saying, if nothing happens in the next few days, we're going to take our marbles and go home. We're going to stop participating in this peace negotiation. I think the Russians are signaling, sure, no problem. Hey, you guys leave. We can always just talk directly to Ukrainians. Have a nice day, and we'll just proceed without you. Thanks for your help.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting situation, right? Because now there's been calls, I believe by the Europeans, but I'm sure there's some in the American establishment asking for this as well, of a complete and total worldwide ban on all Russian energy exports. Which, I mean, we can get into how crazy that is, but
sure.
but even then, okay, Russia could be like, okay, we'll just collapse we'll just do it internally. Well, we can just literally ride you out while the rest of the world then collapses. Because what you're proposing is a collapse of all of everything,
sure,
all at once.
Yeah.
Like
a worldwide ban starting with India and China.
Of course,
how's that going to work?
Sure, I mean,
it's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. It's beyond ridiculous. Like countries have gone to war over less. Like now with India now threatening to go to war with Pakistan, we're getting some reports, leaks, whatever, that it looks like India might strike Pakistan within the next 24 hours.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's interesting because since they both got
internet
nukes,
said it, so it must be true, Jim. But
must be true. The internet's well, since they both got nukes, there hasn't been another war between India and Pakistan. It's been a real peacekeeper in the region. Maybe that clock is about to run out. I don't know. Yeah,
who knows? I mean, I couldn't really care less. The other thing I think is interesting is this now, because of course, India and Pakistan, that whole situation was created by the UK, by the
the Brits were at the bottom of it.
Well, I mean,
hard to believe.
What happens when you carve out an area in a foreign country and give it to a hostile party within that nation?
Let's see. Wait a minute. Let's see. India, Pakistan, Cyprus, Israel, Palestine. What else? Where else? Is there any place the Brits haven't left time bombs?
Ireland.
Oh, yes. Don't forget. Close to home. Sure. No problem.
Could have been Scotland, too. I just think the Scottish folded, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of places around the world where even Indochina, people point out, but that was the French, except that when the Japanese surrendered, who did they surrender to? The French weren't in a position to take Indochina back, so they surrendered to the British. Right. And then the British sort of left a mess when they departed.
Yeah, Hong Kong. It's the whole most of modern history is just littered with like failed British experiments of like, hey, what would happen if we just carve up places and put all these people around? It could be like a little bit of like divide and conquer, let's say. It'd be fine, and as long as their fingers are on the button and they have control over the situation, it kind of works out. You can always create a crisis that demands interventions. Well, the intervention.
There's a map. I think you can just pull it up if you do a search. Map of countries that have not been invaded by the United Kingdom, and I think Mongolia and maybe 3 other countries have met that definition. And it's a pretty small list, very exclusive list. Countries that have not been invaded by the United Kingdom.
Oh, hang on. Let me see if I can pull this up.
You finding it there?
Yeah, wait a second. Only 22 countries have never been invaded by Britain.
Oh, it's even more. Okay, well, good for them. Okay.
Let's see if we can here we go.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think for all the talk about Russia, China, whoever, I think the list is a lot. Of countries they've not invaded is much, much bigger.
Yeah, I'm just going to supersize it for our guests here. Oops. Okay, hang on.
Will I be able to see it?
Yeah. 2 shakes. Oops.
You're so technically proficient.
Well,
hasn't happened yet.
I have my uses there, Jim.
There you go. Okay.
Can you see it?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I see it now.
So
So let's see.
countries that have never been invaded by the British.
Turkmenistan. Okay, they have not invaded Turkmenistan. Good for
Mostly
them.
because the French got there
Yeah.
first. Andorra, Belarus, Bolivia, Burundi, Central African Republic, Chad, Congo Republic, Guatemala, Ivory Coast, Kazakhstan, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Mali, Marshall Islands, Monaco, Mongolia, Paraguay, Sao Tome Principe, Sweden, Takistan, Uzbekistan, and the Vatican City.
Sweden, interesting.
Hmm.
Hmm. I
Hmm.
guess the Brits are more peace loving than I thought.
Well, I guess they just maybe they just don't like salted fish. You have to batter everything, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Anyways, so yeah, that's going on. Again, I don't know. Do we want to spend any more time on the mostly failed peace process?
I don't think so. It is what it is. What I would say is that the good thing that I think we're coming to a critical juncture where pretty much every side has their cards out on the table now, and nobody's fooling anybody at this point. The Americans are trying to trap the Russians with a ceasefire. The Russians understand that they're not biting. The Russians are trying to pull the Americans toward a comprehensive peace settlement. They know that's not going to happen. The Americans simply can't do it, and the Ukrainians and the Europeans are just sort of thrashing around, trying to find some way to keep this war going and not lose it. And they're not sure what the Americans are going to do. And I think the Americans just want to unload it on the Europeans and pretend it's not our problem, even though it really is. So, I think we're getting close to that. Then that throws the ball back into the Russians' court. Okay, now what are you going to do? There's not going to be a political settlement. You won't fall for another ceasefire. What's your plan? After you get done killing every man in Ukraine, which is, frankly, I don't think the way they should be fighting this war, but I think that is itself a function of the desire to have a negotiated settlement. Once they understand now that that's not going to happen, do they switch their strategy to say, let's just finish this thing? A lot fewer people will die. I mean, how many Ukrainians are dying every day? 1,000, 2,000? How many Russians? At least a few hundred, I would think. Or maybe it's only 100. But that adds up. I mean, we were the United States was being torn apart when we lost 200 men a week in Vietnam, in a country of 200 million people. So it's, this is wearing on the Russians too. You'd think they would have a real incentive to say, okay, if there's not going to be a settlement, if we can't pressure the other side offering something reasonable, let's just win this war as expeditiously and as, frankly, cheaply as possible in terms of lives. And that counts on both sides. And again, get rid of Zelensky, get rid of the Rada, get rid of the SBU, get rid of the bridges, get rid of all the command structures, make it impossible for Ukraine to wage this war. Well, and they haven't done it yet.
Let's get into let's play a little game of and then what, as we were talking before. It's a critical thing that I always add to my analysis. Anyone who's watched the show routinely knows that I often go to and then what. Because I think, as you pointed out, not many people are doing that, and also I think it's a critical part of analysis.
Yeah.
So you can take the data, put it into a framework,
right?
Expect to see some things spit out, and then you have to always ask the question, okay, and then what? And if this is all true, and then they're going to be doing this, then it's like, then what's the follow up?
Right.
If there's no follow up, then your analysis is sort of like, well, I don't know, then they do a thing. And then other things will happen, and water is wet, and Kiev is pronounced Kiev. I don't know. What do you want from me? So Kiev, that failed attempt at creating a new national identity. So let's plug this into and then what? So what if Russia wins? Now we've talked about the creation of Novorossiya. Which has been sort of hinted at, depending on who you listen to, depending on what day and what year. We've heard little rumors of it. I've added it to my analysis and warning people, both privately and publicly, that as soon as you start hearing Novorossiya being mentioned quite often, that'll be the end point. Like that's when Russia's going to be really driving it home. I think you're going to start hearing a lot more about that. There's another term that hasn't really been talked about, other than maybe in Russian circles, which is Malorussia, which would be sort of the northern, or another word for it is Galicia, which would be like the northern half of Ukraine. Let me just pull this up.
Well, I think Galicia applied to the areas much farther west, out where Lvov is, Ivano-Frankivsk, those areas.
Yeah.
Galicia was the areas inside Austria before World War One, at least to my understanding.
Okay, maybe I'm getting that wrong, but let's just pull. We'll pull this.
There you go.
Yeah. And if you can see it,
I can see it.
So, oops, there we go. So yeah, so Novorossiya would be this section over here in the sort of southeastern part.
Right.
You're probably right there, Jim. I was Galicia would probably be around Lvov in this whole area here.
Yeah, it looks like it's what, brown and blue or something like that. What kind of
shaded,
strange map is that?
Yeah, some sort of shaded area. The blue would be Malorussia, and then the yellow would be what's left of Ukraine.
Well, so, I think the blue and yellow in that center section is Malorussia.
Oh, is it? Okay.
It's the Ukrainian flag, see? So they're saying that would be Malorussia, and then I think the Russian flag, that would be Novorossiya. And then that shaded blue and brown area with some other little things I can't quite make out would be the far west, which would include Galicia, Ivano-Frankivsk, those areas that were not in the Russian Empire before 1940. Again, there are variations on the borders as they existed over the years, but generally speaking, the far west was Austrian before 1914 and Polish before 1939. So, and again, if I were looking at it from the Russian point of view, this would be the least I would settle for. It includes Odessa and Kharkov. That's the important thing. Frankly, I would take more than this if I were in their shoes, but I'm not in their shoes. They're going to have to figure this out themselves. What is concerning, though, is at this point, Putin is still talking in terms of the 4 oblasts, which is considerably smaller than what's shown on this map, because this one shows Odessa and Kharkov as well. I don't know if it shows Sumy. I'm trying to see. I don't think it does. It's a little hard for me to see on this map. In any case, we always hear from people that for the Russians, it's not about territory. What they're trying to do is destroy the Ukrainian army, and also denazification, demilitarization, so on and so forth. It's not about acquiring additional territory, but it is about people. And at some point, they have to ask themselves, do we want to leave the residents of Odessa or Kharkov or Kiev or wherever under the rule of some rump Ukrainian state that Moscow does not control? And for that matter, as some people have asked, how does Russia impose, quote, denazification on areas that they don't directly control? Do they parachute Mr. Medvedchuk or Azarov or somebody in and form a, for want of a better term, puppet government that then they support and they can clear out of those elements? I have to assume somebody in Moscow is thinking about all this stuff, and they probably have multiple contingency plans based on both political and military developments. But these are serious questions for the end game that you can speculate about, but I don't think anybody really knows the answers.
Let me just read from this article that I found saying Russia needs Novorossiya. This is by Nicholas Nicolaides. So sounds like a fellow Greek. I'm not quite sure which site this is from. It looks like it's a Russian site or a Russian.
Send me the link. Yeah, okay.
I did on X.
Oh, you did. That's right. That's yes.
So he writes here: Russia needs Novorossiya and Malorussia, at least the part of Malorussia that is east of the Dnieper River. These parts are not Ukrainian. They never were and never will be. These parts are apparently he's been talking to who's the name I'm thinking about? Okay, look on there.
Who, Dugin or somebody like
Dugin,
that? Or?
Yeah, that's it. Because that's strangely a Dugin talking point. These parts were not Ukrainian, and they never were and never will be. These parts are as genuinely Russian as Moscow or St. Petersburg, but because of the historical mistake, the breakup of the Soviet Union, instead of the modernization of it, these parts are now outside of Mother Russia. That would not be a catastrophe if these lands were part of a democratic pro-Russian Ukraine, or if they were a sovereign and pro-Russian country like Belarus or Kazakhstan. They would still be part of the Russian world with very close ties to the motherland. But now these lands are occupied by a Nazi junta in Kiev, placed there by the USA after an armed coup against the legal government and President Yanukovych. These Russian lands are now filled with American, Polish, Baltic, and other mercenaries and armed Nazis that are repressing the Russians and the anti-junta Ukrainians and killing anyone who openly protests. The worst part is that Russia has missed several legal opportunities to rectify this. Just after the coup in Russia, had every right to reinstate the legal president and his government that were intentionally recognized.
Internationally.
Internationally recognized. And as long as the killings continue and Kiev, I gotta stop saying this, the N-word, because YouTube will BTFO us. As long as the killings continue, the Kiev junta does not fulfill the Minsk II agreement, Russia still has the right to intervene and liberate all of Novorossiya from Kharkov to Odessa and Malorossiya too. That way, by reaching Odessa, Russia would also save Transnistria, which is another Russian region that is besieged by Kiev junta and by Moldova. Russia cannot afford to let these lands be forced into NATO and filled with American missiles and aimed at Moscow. Okay, so yes. Instead of liberating Novorossiya or helping the army of Novorossiya to do the main part of the job, Russia has helped to save Syria. Now that is of course good, but Russia should do in Novorossiya what she has done in Syria to help the majority of people.
Wait. When was this written?
Yeah, I'm just looking at that as well.
Because obviously Syria didn't get saved in the end.
This is from 2017.
Oh my, okay.
Yeah. So this is even before all the good stuff started happening.
Yeah.
But anyway,
what's remarkable is how current this mapping out and is even today. I mean, these questions were on the plate back then. For various reasons we can discuss, we didn't get to this crunch point, but now we're finally getting there.
Well, so the end of the article is this: the battle for Novorossiya and eastern Malorossiya will be determined determined in the, I think he's trying to say, the Kremlin. And as soon as the Russian leaders decide to liberate Novorossiya, it will be so, and very much faster than the liberation of Syria. To detach the Russian economy from the dollar, to start the Russian bank card, to replace SWIFT, and to introduce a gold-based ruble, not gold interchangeable, are the first steps on this path, but they have to be followed by more steps now. And what do we see?
That's a pretty ambitious agenda.
Well, hang on, but what do we see? I mean, the Russian economy still hasn't fully detached from the dollar. I don't expect it.
That's correct.
Yeah, but
there's no gold-backed ruble.
Right, but they are trying to move towards that with BRICS.
Then Trump will put 100% tariffs on them. He said, if they do that, to defend our great dollar.
Replace SWIFT. Well, they got kicked out of SWIFT, so they kind of had to do a little bit of SWIFT replacement. And Russian bank card. Well, they've kind of done that as well. The interesting, the outlier here, and I guess this person could have known this in 2017, is the inclusion of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin being a major player in international finance, and might give a lot of countries like Russia and China and a few others different avenues to explore in terms of, let's say, sovereign currency. So. We shall see. We got $5 from Steve Ambrose Rudko. Always appreciate the knowledge from these fine young gentlemen. Appreciate you, sir. Especially the compliments. Always appreciate it. And shout out to the chat. I see you going there, folks. We will. If you have any questions or concerns or things you want to ask Jim, just.
Can I see the chat?
If you're signed on to YouTube, I'm not sure if you can. I'll read them out.
Okay.
Send us a super chat, and I will ask.
No, I'm on Streamlabs. Okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
Just wondering.
So yeah, Novorossiya, Malorossiya, Ukrainian Federation. So, and asking the and then what question, I think these are notable things to then
Mhm.
suppose that are on the table
Right.
of Putin and co. What say you, sir? Um, what do you think
Yeah.
the and then what's will be if we'll just say if Russia wins?
Yeah.
They haven't won yet, so we'll play the if game. If Russia wins, or is declared a winner, or gets an unconditional surrender from Ukraine, and Zelensky becomes the president in hiding.
Yeah. In exile
Yeah,
in
yeah. Um,
Paraguay.
sure. From
Juan Guaido.
Epstein Island Port 2.0. Um, what do you think then is the reconstruction plan? What do you think Russia will start to do? Uh, do you think they're going to confine themselves to the four oblasts? I know now they're openly calling for Odessa, which is something that Putin has been saying in speeches, but now seems to be officially saying that no, that's ours too. So, what do you see the aftermath of let's say the military win, or do you see this winning through military? What are your supposes?
Um, Putin, as far as I know, has not changed what he said in June of last year, that if you give them the four open and neutral Ukraine, then they will agree to a ceasefire. With that sort of basically template for the final settlement. I think even today, his inclination would be to settle for minimalist goals if the other side would offer them. I think that's a really bad approach on his part, but I think that's what he would do. I think all of his history up till now has been that if the other side will put anything reasonable on the table, he will agree to it. And the minimum is the full constitutional limits of the four oblasts, which the Ukrainians would have to vacate, including from the cities of Zaporozhye and Kherson. Now, I don't think anybody's going to offer that, though. And supposedly, by the way, take it for what it's worth, these reports, Witkoff advised offering that to the Russians, and instead they settled for the Kellogg approach, was okay, we'll grit our teeth and offer them Crimea, but we won't offer them anything else, line of control, ceasefire, blah, 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 which then forces the Russians to keep on going. If at some point somebody says, okay, we cry uncle, we'll give you the four oblasts, do they stop? At what point do they revise that and say, well, wait a minute now, we've just taken half of Sumy, half of Kharkov, we're on the other side of the Dnieper River, we're going to retake the city of Kherson and then move on to Nikolaev and Odessa, and it starts looking about like your map of Novorossiya here. Do they change their mind and then up their demands or not? I don't know. I suspect there's probably a real division of opinion within Russia. You also hear a lot of people saying, well, they want to make a really hard distinction between these areas are Russian, these are Russian speakers, but these areas are Ukrainian. And anybody familiar with Ukraine knows it's not that simple. I mean, that, large parts of Ukraine speak, Surzhyk, and the people are Ukrainian, but they're also kind of Russian too. And, cities tend to be very Russian speaking, even in the middle of Ukraine. So, it's not that simple to say, oh, these are Ukrainians, those are Russians, this is where the line is, I mean, Putin's whole approach is talk about the Ruski Mir, the Russian world, all the history of the Rus state that he told Tucker Carlson about. I mean, that all points against this notion of this hard and fast distinction between Russians and Ukrainians. And so I now, as you know, too, part of what the West anticipated was that when the Russians moved in February 2022, is that the Russians would, they would fight the war American style, shock and awe, destroy everything in sight, occupy the whole country, and then they could settle down for a guerrilla war and turn Ukraine into Afghanistan. That didn't happen. I don't think it can happen, to tell the truth. I mean, I think most of the people that would be real problems are probably out there in that little Galicia section in the far west. And if the Poles want them, welcome to them. And the Russians have as much said that. So, I think there are a lot of variables, contingencies on the table. I think the real question is when and if they switch their strategy from a pedagogical strategy to force the other side to come up with a realistic deal, as opposed to say, okay, there's not going to be any realistic deal. We decide in advance what we want, put the troops there, impose the settlement, and then the other guys have to simply live with it. And I don't know if they're at that point yet, or whether they will reach that point.
Well, let's plug this in, right? Let's
Okay.
Since we're playing suppose. Let's suppose that Novorossiya was always the goal. Now, how they achieved the goal was always the dispute within Russia. Because I think Putin and maybe his cohort really do believe, because at the end of the day, Putin is a lawyer.
Yeah.
And so maybe Putin was really thinking, hey, the way we settle this is through rules-based order, legalistic. We drop contracts, we make trade agreements. That's how things are done. We don't want to settle this militarily because then it's always in dispute, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then, as I speculated, and I think this is bearing out more and more, that the internal Duma is far more loyal or has more military connections than not, and that side I think is winning, and has been sort of biding their time and going, okay, you play your little lawyer games. Hey, if it works, fantastic. We agree with you. You have some good points, but we don't think it's going to work. Go ahead, do your thing, right? Now that that's I think finally just realized that this is not going to work. The Americans' mind, I think this is why they're offering Crimea. In the American mind, that's a hugely valuable thing for Americans, because remember the whole Crimea thing, the thing that really started most of this problem back in 2014 was because the Americans wanted to put submarine bases on freaking Crimea. And that's where the Russians went, no, never going to happen. We gotta start taking land, because obviously you guys have completely lost the plot. So in the American mind, they're like, look, we'll give you, okay, fine. You have Crimea. We'll give it to you. No more military bases on Crimea. Like that's the gift.
Yeah.
In the American mind, that would be the gift. But again, someone said something recently, and I don't know where the post is, but I thought it was quite good, is that Russia's playing on team reality and America's playing on team narrative. And that doesn't mean that because Russia's playing on team reality, that team reality is superior. In fact, team reality has a lot of drawbacks, because you keep expecting people to react and work within reality, and then they continuously don't, because they're in team narrative. And team narrative is like, look, we spin this beautiful narrative. Look at this story. Like, it's a beautiful story, isn't it? Here, just read the story and just agree to it, and it's fine. It's like, no, because team reality says yet. So okay. So, but let's just say Novorossiya was then
always their goal. Okay.
Yeah, that's the goal, and you can't get there with the international based order. Maybe Westphalia 2.0 is coming back. We can get into that a little bit, but now it's looking, it's going to be the military situation, because now Putin's even come out and said we're confident in a military victory. Right. So what that looks like in terms of, I mean, that also puts full mobilization on the table.
All right. Let me ask you a question, though. If your goal was that map right there, showing the areas in the tricolor as Novorossiya, and that was your goal all along, would you have fought this war the way they have fought it? In other words, let's suppose that all along that was their goal, to get from A to B, and that was the B. Would you have fought the war the way they're doing it? I don't think they would have. Well,
see, but here's the thing. I think actually you do. Again, let's plug this. We're playing suppose, right?
Okay.
Suppose Novorossiya is the goal. Okay, so there's your first data point. Secondary data point, as Putin wants to achieve that mostly through negotiation and only using the military to essentially prove a point, right? To basically occupy some territory and then use that as a basis.
Now stop right there. Okay, suppose that's your goal, but for some reason you've got it in your head that that's the better way to achieve it, and that there's your problem right there. You know.
Oh yeah. I'm not saying
there's your problem right there.
I'm not
saying, because the other side's never going to concede it diplomatically.
Right. I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm just simply saying I'm simply saying that this seems to match the data that we see. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's what I keep saying. That's why I keep saying the Russian military use has been pedagogical. Inflict pain until the other side will say,
Right.
you can have that.
Right.
And they don't seem to understand that ain't going to happen.
Right. So, but it also factors into the idea that why is Russia not destroying bridges? Why is Russia not doing
Exactly.
attacking infrastructure? Because
Yeah.
I believe that they're saying, well, we're going to occupy this, and we still want those bridges and infrastructure to basically move goods because we're going to create this new country out of this area.
No, but I mean, look at the map though.
Yeah.
If you destroyed the bridges over the Dnieper, you would be able to then capture all that stuff in the north, which is still colored blue and yellow, like Ukrainian flag, like Chernigov on the eastern bank of the Dnieper, and then you say, okay, fine, we'll give you that back, but you have to give us Odessa,
Right.
which is on the other side of the Dnieper River. In other words, destroying the bridges would make a whole lot of sense if their goal was actually to conquer Novorossiya, but it doesn't seem to be that that's what they were thinking.
Well, again, I think if you're looking at a contract win, it does make sense. Again,
exactly.
From a contract win, right? Not from not from a military win, from a contract win. It makes total sense because again, Putin is one of the wealthiest men on the planet because he is essentially the de facto owner or CEO or whatever you want to call it of Gazprom. So he's just thinking gas. He's thinking gas and oil. That's what he's thinking. That's how he maneuvers. I think that he's the spokesperson for that group.
If that is the case, then you're really depressing me here because it means that he's not really thinking about like a statesman. And maybe you're right. Maybe that's the case. I don't know.
What do we know about Putin? Right? We know that Putin is a kleptomaniac. Legit.
I don't think we know that at all.
Yes, of course we do.
People certainly allege that. I don't know that there's any truth to that.
He stole a ring off some guy's finger. He went into a museum. This is like part of the register. Like this, I don't think this has ever been disputed. Walked into a museum or an art gallery where there was a glass gun that was filled with vodka or could be filled with vodka. And he basically told his security forces to go take it, and they left with it. And they're like, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "Oh, it's ours now." Like, there's many. I could look up the stories. Yeah. Like, there's tons of stories. Yeah. I think confirmed. It's certainly not disputed that Putin his record from when he was a young KGB man, where he bought a sports car and expensive clothes, and that was very like, whoa, dude. And this is still during the Soviet Union, where like you could get done for that. And he wanted it, right? Like he likes these things. Now he's a much older man now. Maybe he's grown. Maybe that was a phase. Who knows? But if we're just again going by data, I think he's a bit of a kleptomaniac.
Yeah.
So
again, you say it's not disputed. Most of this I've not heard. My understanding of him from what I've heard about him is quite a bit different. But let's sort of leave that on the table.
Sure. Oh, just in terms of like, if he's looking to acquire as much as he can, and then not have to repair as much as he can, because they're going to have to do rebuilding efforts, which gets us into North Korea, by the way, other North Koreans.
Well, they rebuilt Mariupol. That must have cost a pretty penny.
Right, and now the rebuilding efforts the areas he's taken over.
Look at the way Grozny was rebuilt.
Yeah, or the bridge over to Crimea, all the rest of it.
The Kursk bridge, all that stuff. I mean, that doesn't show penny pinching.
Right. At the end of the day,
Kopek pinching.
Even if he only secures the 4 oblasts, the repairs to like Kherson City and like many of these other places is going to be massively extensive.
Yeah,
he's going to need a big purse, which would involve China, and I think a lot of workers, which would include North Korea. And North Korea likes to do a lot of leasing of people. So we we're on Rachel Blevins, am I mispronouncing that correctly? Show, and one of the questions she posed to you was now the confirmation that North Korean troops were involved in Kherson, not Kherson, in
Kursk.
In Kursk, thank you. Which was kind of bandied about, were they, weren't they? I remember when I heard the reports, I'm like, well, look, it's not impossible that the media is just confused like Central Asians for Koreans. It's like I wouldn't put it past them, but we'll wait.
Wait! You mean they all look alike?
Well, not to me, Jim. I'm
just saying. I mean, I'm surprised and shocked how racist our media is. I am appalled.
Anyone who's got Slightly
Yaku, Korean,
Sino,
Chinese, whatever, all the same, right?
whatever.
Kyrgyz.
Except when it comes to Eastern Europeans, apparently then we're very distinct. Like
Oh, you
Russians and
bet.
Ukrainians, completely different. I'm surprised it hasn't shown up in 43andMe or something like that.
No, they're not. They're not. They're not even the same race. I mean, Ukrainians are Goths.
Of course,
Haven't you heard?
yeah,
Goths.
Those Jewish Goths.
Jewish Goths.
Yeah.
They're like Croatians are Goths too.
Right. $5 from Steve Ambrose. Love you mean it. Yes. Good. Buck Johnson says we are hobby lobbying up Jason's chat. Oh my goodness. I'm not quite sure I get the reference. And Buck, of course, shout out to Buck Johnson and Counterflow. He just had on, is it Connor from World War III?
No, Conrad.
Conrad, thank you.
Yes, Conrad France. Yeah,
I'm going to
great guy.
Send you an email to reach out. He name dropped you on the show, so
good. Okay,
have young Conrad on to discuss.
We should. As well. Yeah, from deep in the heart of Texas.
Deep in the heart of Texas. Only thing out of Texas is steers and short wares. So
no, that's Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. Okay, so we're playing the supposed game. So we're supposing Novorossiya is the game plan. We're supposing that that Putin and co had their moment of trying to negotiate this out. That's over now. We're now entering the military solution. Let's say, if that's true, what do we expect to see in the next little bit? Because now we're into spring. The ground's going to be nice and dry, and Russia's been stockpiling. So, what do you expect to see in the next few months in terms of the war front?
I'll tell you honestly, Jason, I can't not give you, if we want to take your suppose, what if it is their goal to actually militarily take control of those areas? Yeah, you can think of all sorts of things they could do. They could come up from the south. Where's the place called? I'm trying to think of it. It's near Tokmak in the south, where the Ukrainians impaled themselves on the Surovikin line during their offensive in the fall of 2023. I'm trying to think. It begins with an O, but it basically, if you go straight north, you get to Zaporozhye city. That's obviously one possibility. I heard a report today that the Russians already have some people on the western side of the Dnieper in the region of Kherson. Remember, they took Kherson early in the war and then vacated it when they realized that, there's not going to be an agreement. We're actually have to defend ourselves against a Ukrainian counteroffensive, which they successfully did, but they pulled out of Kherson. It was very controversial. They could, they obviously could build on their advance in the Sumy region, which was part of the defeat of the Kursk incursion into Russia. But now they're, I think, 20 kilometers from the city of Sumy, which is a fairly substantial place. And they've also got some areas in the Kharkov region. Again, one of the big question marks for me in the conduct of the war is, why, Kharkov is in a very exposed position geographically. I mean, people say, oh, you can't storm a city the size of Kharkov. It's the second biggest city in Ukraine. No, of course not. Why would you do that? I mean, but in terms of Kharkov's connections to the rest of Ukraine, you could cut off the roads and the rail access from Kharkov to the rest of Ukraine, and then you wait. I mean, you don't have to take it. Eventually, it's going to have to surrender. There are things they could do if they want to pursue that map. Now, a lot of people have been saying it looks like they may be preparing for this. Are they preparing for it, or do they only want to appear to be preparing for it? So the other side will say, all right, fine, we'll finally come to the table. Again, is it pedagogical or is it meant to actually be unleashed? We won't know until they actually do it.
Well, I think if the intent is to take Odessa, they're going to have to do something militarily. There is no way.
No.
Ukraine is ever going to give up Odessa without, like I said, mobilization of every single man, woman, and child will happen before they just give up Odessa. So people understand, like Odessa is the jewel for both Russia and Ukraine. Yeah. That's the access to the Black Sea.
For the Ukrainians and for the Russians, it basically means it takes them all the way over to Pridnestrovia, to Transnistria.
Yeah, exactly.
And then basically it turns Ukraine in whatever. See, that's the other point here too, is that even if they take something relatively limited, like the map shows, essentially between Odessa and Kharkov, what is left of Ukraine, that blue and yellow thing in the middle of what you're calling Malorossiya, it really is not a very viable state at that point. It becomes essentially a client state of Russia economically, and maybe that's what they're thinking. That if you basically can castrate Ukraine and take not only the major industrial and agricultural regions, but what's left of it is dependent economically for access to the sea through Russia. The Russians basically it becomes a second Belarus essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Or becomes, like I said, a suburb of Poland, which I mean,
yeah.
again,
Well, the far western part, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I think the Russians have made it very clear they don't want that part. They don't want Galicia. They don't want Lvov. They don't want Ivano-Frankivsk. They do want, they would want protections for the Pochayev monastery out there. But other than that, I don't think they care about that area at all.
Right. And I honestly think if the far west fell under, let's just call it Poland, whatever, right?
The rest of them, yeah.
Yeah. Under that cadre, I honestly don't think that the Orthodox Church would be under attack. Right.
Yeah, to tell the truth, I think you're right. I mean, I think that the canonical church has suffered a lot more at the hands of the Ukrainian schismatics and the Kiev regime than the Poles or the Hungarians or any of those people would do anything to them. No. So I think that would not be a big worry.
Well, because they would have to deal with they would then have to deal with the Orthodox within their own countries as well. Yeah, that would be a problem.
Yeah, the other thing, of course, too, is that again, in terms of the heartland of the Banderists. Remember the Volhynia massacres from, during the war and all that, it won't be any picnic for the Poles to have to take control of those regions if the Russians say you're welcome to them while the rest of Ukraine is restructured because, they're going to fight like scorpions in a bottle at that point. It'll be the Poles' problem, not the Russians. And I don't think anybody's going to look favorably. I mean, it's not going to be a pretty picture.
Well, let's play the other suppose. Because we've mentioned this on the show, and the one thing that map doesn't talk about, but it has been at least floated, is the making Ukraine into a republic, right? A multifaceted republic, which would breaking up all the remaining oblasts or areas into smaller states,
or a confederation, for example. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And if that's on the table. And maybe that's what's really being negotiated, perhaps behind closed doors. Because I find it very interesting that Lavrov, who just went on a media storm recently, has been repeating and reiterating quite often that the what's his exact phrase? It's something along the lines of the foundational issues have to be attended to or have to be addressed, and now Lavrov has just come out and said something along the lines of. Only Trump and Trump's people are at least addressing the foundational issues with Ukraine. So,
I didn't hear him say Trump's people. I just heard him say Trump.
Right.
And frankly, I'll tell you, Jason, I think he was buttering him up.
Sure.
I mean, I think he was stroking Trump's ego to say only Trump understands. He's such a genius, He's the only one who understands the real issues at stake here. And I think Trump likes to hear stuff like that, especially since when this whole, ceasefire nonsense falls apart as it's doing right now, and Trump is denied his win, he's going to want to blame somebody, and it's in the Russians' advantage, and also Zelensky is to say, "Oh, I'm not the one who sank your deal, Mr. Trump. It was those guys over there."
Yeah, did you see Putin's painting gift to Trump?
No.
Let's see if I can pull it up here. Where is it? Oh, here it is. I'll pull it. Oh, yeah, okay. Take your cookies. Let me see if I can get it here. Yeah, here he is. Can you see that? It's basically a painting of Trump with his hand, after Trump was was shot at, behind the big American flag with his hand raised up and the blood on his cheek. Right.
This
is his gift. This is Putin's gift to Trump. And
But wait a minute, wait. Is it a 3-part? It's like a triptych.
No, I think this is just a picture. The main image in the middle is
the painting. Okay.
Yeah. So I think it's it was a portrait. So someone that was asking me about that, Matt Erickson was asking me about that. What my opinions on it would be, like why he would send it, and
I think it's pretty obvious.
Well, sure. Well, okay, but hang on. Let's see if it is obvious, because I made one response I can't remember, but I thought about it afterwards. I think, and I would look at it as a reminder, because I think what, narratively speaking, right? Putin might be setting it up as like, look, you're a great man. You are America's great man. You need to go be a great man for America. Don't forget what they try to do to you, right?
Yeah.
So go be a great man in America. I am the great man of Russia. This is Putin talking. I'm going to be the great man of I'm going to be the great man of Russia. So you go be the great man of America. I'll be the great man of Russia, and we can just forget all about this stuff, right? Like, why are we doing this? Why are we squabbling?
I can see that those other, you might say, subliminal messages are there.
Sure.
But I think the one that's front and center, that screams at the top of its lungs, is, Mr. Trump, you're so great. You're so smart. You're so wonderful. We almost think as much of you as you do of yourself.
Pretty cleose. I thought the gold frame was very nice.
Oh, of course, yeah, I know. Are there little T's on the frame, like letter T, like jump around the frame?
I think it's that would be the pièce de résistance. Random username $10 USD. Monetary recognition of the time spent keeping people up to date on Ukraine. Everyone buy Jim's book. I try to warn you. The collected work of George Jatras. We will be getting to a part of James's book entitled If God Ran the State Department, in the second half of the show. Sorry?
Oh. No, I was just looking for a copy of the book myself. It's around here somewhere.
I got you. Don't worry. It's ready to go.
Okay.
Here we go. Whoa. There we go.
Oh, it's right there.
Yeah.
Right there.
Special shout out, of course, to Fox and Sons. Steve Fox, a friend of the channel, has his coffee company that he set up to teach his sons all about the coffee business and enjoy the gift of coffee with them as well. If you'd like to get some coffee sent to your door, some amazing American freedom coffee, go down to the links below. You get 15% off of orders of $30 or more if you use the code NOW. And for orders of $40 or more, you get free shipping across the continental United States, which is an awfully nice gift, especially these troubled times. Get some coffee in you. Or as friend of the show, Tommy Salmons like to say, get some BBC in your mouth, baby. Big, bold coffee. Get in your mouth. That's Fox and Sons, proud supporter of the show. Of course, there's many ways of supporting the show. One of the best ways, of course, is go over to GUMROAD, get yourself a copy of Tales of Shadow Empire. Jim is part of that series, Volume 1, detailing a lot of the going on with the economic collapse, which I think we're going to start seeing in this month. Already, the British press is starting to pick up on it and using the word collapse. I told you. I try to warn you. But you can always get a copy of that. George. Jim and I.
See? Gemini. That's one of the constellations, Gemini, right?
Gemini and I.
Jimmy. What's the French word for collapse?
Collapse?
Yeah.
Well, be more like disparu.
I don't like financial collapse.
That's a good question.
Sometimes Legolas. No, that was the elf on Lord of the Rings.
C'est dégueulasse. C'est en Poutine. En Poutine. You know what Poutine actually means in Quebecois? It means a big mess. So it would be
I thought that was that stew that comes with like mashed potatoes and stuff like that.
No, it's French fries, gravy, and cheese curds.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, that's it.
Poutine. But it
means like a mess.
But in Quebecois, it means a big mess. So,
yeah. But that dish is called that.
Yeah.
A big mess.
Big mess. So go over Gumroad, get yourself a copy. Of course, you always send me money over on PayPal. Again, links in the description below. Best way of doing that, because it gets around all the little cuts and payouts to YouTube and other places. But I appreciate it. Buck Johnson, $4.99 USD. This super chat is to ask JJ a question. in Macho Man voice, but don't read this to him. Oops.
You should put the "don't read this to him" at the beginning.
Attention. Schmuck. Don't read this. Well, Jimmy.
So what's the question?
What is the question? Any question will do.
No, yeah, that was it was a question you're supposed to ask in a march.
I know. I'm asking Buck through the. Buck, what is the question? Thinking. You gotta always be thinking if you're the Macho Man. The cream rises to the top. Guyena, you're trash.
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good Macho Man accent.
Buck Johnson is trash, just like Tito Santana. I need the trash bucket visual aid. Damn it, Jason. Oh, I know, Buck. Well, text me next time. Come on the show. Then you can ask him whatever you want, or tell me, or just whisper it in my ear. What else is going on? Other ways to support the show, look in the description below. I appreciate all the love and support. Of course, send us a super chat. Buy a subscription on YouTube. $2 get you in to the Mirren Chads group. If you want to be a Mirren, a Mirren Chud. If you want to be a Mirren Chad, there's $25. You can also support us that way as well. So, appreciate you. And of course, as mentioned before, I try to warn you, Amazon and other fine booksellers, go get yourself a copy. It's a fantastic read. Through the Times, Life and Times of George Jatras is written through the collective writings and works. So before we get to that, any last words on the and then what's of the Ukraine-Russia situation if Russia wins, when Russia wins at this point? Will we see this? I would expect to see this conflict in one way or shape or form continue for the next little while. I don't think we're going to see the end of anything anytime soon.
Sadly, I think that's probably the case. It does come down to what the Russians are thinking and what they decide to do. And then what knows don't talk, and then what talks don't know.
Right.
And we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, even a knockout punch at this point. Again, Odessa would be the knockout punch. I think a lot of people are concentrated on Kiev, but Kiev would be almost symbolic.
Well, again, it depends on what you want, what constitutes knockout punch. If it means destroying the Ukrainian government, yeah, and then you do what you want to do. You don't. In other words, again, you don't have to battle your way into Odessa if that's what they want to do. I think that would be horrendously costly if they want to do it that way.
Well, here's a consideration too, right? If the real enemy here is not Ukraine or the Kiev regime, but those who are backing it. If the real enemy really is the UK and France, and let's just say the EU in general.
And unfortunately, a number of our personnel too. I mean, look, one thing that, for example, Colonel McGregor keeps saying is that if Trump is really serious about ending this war, not only do we cut out the supply of weapons and money, we pull our personnel out because there's an awful lot of American personnel in Ukraine, both either active military or intelligence or contractors.
Well, they're on they're on vacation, I think.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's just basking on the beaches near Odessa or something. I don't know.
Is it extended stay?
And it could happen, but and one of the questions I keep wondering is how many Americans really have died in this war? Do we have any idea?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah,
because Russia has knocked out. I don't know the exact number, but they have knocked out a number of NATO. Knocked out a number of hotels where internationals were staying. Coincidentally,
well, and that strike on Sumy, where they were having a big award thing for the Kursk operation. No, they were just celebrating Palm Sunday. Yeah, right. No, it was a military ceremony, and there apparently were several dozen foreign military types there, and I don't know what nationalities, American, British, French, whatever. And you'd think you'd start hearing from families like, somebody whose brother or husband or father got killed in this thing and say, hey, why is he dying in this war? What's this all about? But you're not hearing it.
Well, there's probably a media blackout on that anyways. But
I'm sure, yeah.
But things get leaked anyways. But I wouldn't be surprised if the American personnel that's over there have basically signed their life away
Yeah,
to that.
yeah.
Like they're basically special ops at that point.
And maybe too, there's some kind of a compensation package for the families that is dependent upon a non-disclosure, in other words, you can't say anything about what the settlement was after your loved one is killed. I don't know. I mean, again, just speculating.
Someone's saying my volume is low. I don't know how else. I've turned it up pretty much as high as I can. Is that better?
Yeah, sometimes you're speaking more directly into the. Right now, you're speaking directly into the microphone. It's much.
Okay.
Now it's loud. Yeah.
There we go. Okay, so let's get to if God ran the State Department.
Now it's too loud. You're getting a reverberation.
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 Let's turn that down a little bit. How's that? Is that
now it's
better?
too low.
Now it's too low. I see what you're doing there, Jim. Don't like it. Don't like it. No, sir, don't like it.
It's good. It's good. It's good. It's good. Right. It's perfect.
Right there. Just don't move from this position.
It's perfect. I tell you, it's perfect.
Boy, look at this. Look, the mensch is on the bench the whole time. Okay. If God ran the State Department, so
yeah.
In this, I mean, this is almost a open letter to Christian nationalists everywhere. Quite often, when I've been back and forth on the topic, mostly because I think from the majority of Christian nationalist speakers that I hear are not cohesive. Like I don't hear an actual plan or position or anything that's being presented that I can go, oh, okay, well, sure, right? Other than, well, people should be Christian, and okay, but which Christians we're talking about, especially when we're talking about America? Like, are we talking about evangelicals? Who are we talking about? But more specifically, it seems to be always deferring back to this: we were once this thing, and now we're not.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure if that was ever really on the table. Again, team narrative tends to win because they can just make stuff up. You can just say things.
Yeah.
But I'll read a little bit of it from it here, Jim. But if you wouldn't mind giving the audience a synopsis of the article, if you can remember, the general premise being put out.
Well, there's essentially two parts of the article. I think it was 1997 in Chronicles magazine. So this was as the contours of the post-Cold War era of global hegemony and post-Christian moral principles was becoming an unmistakable driver behind our global posture. The second part of it deals largely with specific policies like toward the Middle East and things of that sort. But I think the main part of it, the explanation that starts with, is the whole idea behind American independence. And I did downplay the sort of the Freemasonic and religious skeptic part of this in favor of what was actually at that time, up until frankly the 1950s or 1960s, a fairly strong Christian, albeit Protestant, social ethos in this country, where literally people would say this is a Christian country, and everybody understood that, not only a Christian country but a Protestant country. And this was acknowledged in many, many ways, even officially, even though you did not have established religion. Like, we're not going to make the Episcopal Church or the Lutheran Church or the, Methodist Church the official American church. And that how that just sort of degraded over the decades until what we have now. And I guess the question I have to ask is, was it doomed from the start? We keep hearing this phrase, the American experiment. And I ask him the question, okay, when do you say an experiment has failed? Maybe the idea you could throw out 15 centuries of Christian monarchy and an established church and establish a republic on the basis of some ideas of, Greece and Rome in, ancient pagan times. Maybe that doesn't work. Maybe that actually creates an unstable situation that will degrade into what we have today. And that's really the question I'm asking. So I talk about questions of, obviously, what were the principles of governance of Christian states since the time of Constantine, when we had people like, Olaf and Ethelbert and Vladimir and other people adopting Christianity for their states and becoming the state system where the crown and the cross were very closely united. and you had, in every case, an established church. You had like an aristocracy. You had a monarch who had greater or lesser degree of autocratic power. That was the basis of Christian society for many centuries until really, with a few exceptions, the Venetian Republic or something like that, for many centuries until the American Revolution. And we had this idea that, no, we can be our own kings and we can be our own popes too while we're at it. And how did that work out? I even wonder sometimes, it's not even touched in this article, I even wonder sometimes how much of the disorder that occurred in Europe in the subsequent decades, the French Revolution, obviously, the Revolution of 1848, and on into the 19th and 20th century, owes itself to a fuse that was lit in America in the 1770s.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I think the fuse got lit by the British in the 15th century. And it's just kind of carried out. And once
there's some truth to that. I mean, as I like to point out to people, we've there have been 3 Anglo-Saxon civil wars. There was the English Civil War in the 1640s. There was the American Revolution, which was an internal civil war among the the Anglo-Saxon ethnos, not only with the English and the Americans, but among Americans. It really was our first domestic civil war as well. And then, of course, then we had another one in the 1860s. So, I think there is that instability in, if you will, in English civilization that goes back some centuries, and America is, in one sense, just another stage of that.
What do you think of this? 'Cause I've heard people bandy this about that let's say British liberalism, which has now become the sort of universally liberal frame, had it was fine for, was a British invention for the British, and it made sense for the British and made sense for their empire, what they were trying to achieve, and their philosophy, etc. But doesn't work for anybody else. Even for other Europeans, it doesn't seem to work, because the French are very similar civilization in many ways, but even they tend to be a bit more Latin, right? They almost need that sort of Caesar in charge, because when they don't have it, they just kind of become mush and fall apart and almost start to cannibalize their own culture and people. So keeping that in mind, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but just as an interesting starting point, if this liberal experiment was only meant for the British and a very Anglo empire, as soon as you begin to export even to America, which is still an Anglo empire when it really comes down to it, was based on an Anglo empire, but it was also a reaction, in many ways, a rejection of the British style governance. That then becomes the fractal error, that you can't have a 15th century British experiment run wild across the globe. You just get this, what we're looking at.
Yeah. That's a very good question. I'm not sure I have the answer to it, but I think you can point to things in English history that, despite the Norman conquest, there still was kind of a Anglo-Saxon spirit of liberty among Englishmen. We talked about the rights of Englishmen. There was the English Bill of Rights long before there was the American Bill of Rights. There's what they call the castle doctrine, the idea of the man's home is his castle and it's inviolable, even by the king, unless he has a warrant and good reason. Open up in the name of the king. So it's and maybe there was something to that, and maybe even has something to do with the strange fact that England's on an island. It's not that their security situation is very different. In some ways you could say that England's security situation is the same with respect to Europe as America's is to the rest of the world.
Right.
And just as the English way of approaching the world was to maintain some degree of liberty at home domestically in a way that was not common in the rest of Europe, their outward expression was to keep the rest of Europe at daggers against one another so that they couldn't come to England and to their island and bother them. And that's sort of, I guess, what we're doing now. We're trying to keep Eurasia in an uproar so we can maximize our leverage in the rest of the world. So maybe there's something to that. I guess what's interesting, though, is look at the state of the United Kingdom now as basically a police state. and what's happening increasingly in America, which, maybe Trump in some ways is going to try to turn around. But I think whatever's left of that, if you will, Anglo-Saxon spirit of liberty is really, we've become a bunch of sheep, frankly.
Well, I mean, I think to bring it back to Christianity for a second, it's a misread on that sort of tabula rasa liberal ideal,
Mm-hmm.
which is man is only what is given to him, right? So you can just create the ideal man. You take God out of the picture, you put man, you
Sure.
place man in Ubermensch sort of ideal man
Or,
there.
or, or, or Homo Sovieticus.
Sure,
Yeah.
liberal man
Yeah.
exists,
Yeah.
and liberal man exists because he's a collection of all these ideas and all the right opinions and all the right politics and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you put that into the ideal man, all men become ideal. So you can export
Yeah.
this idea to India and Pakistan and all these other places across the globe, and all you need
Yeah.
is a bit more feminism and a bit more education, and a bit more money, and
Or
a bit
when,
more
when
this and a bit more that.
you eat the bugs and
You
you'll
eat the
be happy.
bugs. Why not?
Eat the bugs.
Eats the bugs. It's the most common
Yeah.
denominator we can find.
Yeah.
How much more
Yeah.
common do we need to get than bugs? Yeah, worms. um,
Worms, eats the worms. That's what happened to Martin Luther. They put him on a diet of worms.
oh, jeez.
It's
There you go. Um,
there you go.
yeah. All because all because one king wanted to get divorced. That's why we're here. It's just crazy. Um,
Yeah, I think it even goes back before that, but we'll see. I mean, it's anyway. I think that, in other words, what I tried to do in this thing is to look at some of the deeper strands in not just American civilization or even English Americans, Anglo-American civilization, but of European Christian civilization going back to really the time of Constantine, when we had this kind of a synthesis. And obviously, I would point to that synthesis as essentially an Orthodox understanding of what a Christian state is and how the state and the church interact with one another. And of course, that does relate to it. I don't think I go deeply into it. The fact that you even had in Roman Catholic and Protestant countries a similar understanding, although the balance that existed in the Orthodox order had been disturbed by, on the one hand, papal supremacy, on the other hand, in the Protestant states, royal supremacy over the church. And so, you had that imbalance in the West, which I think helped move along the Gnostic currents that developed primarily in the West and eventually then overwhelmed the eastern part of Christian civilization as well.
well, let's read a little bit from the article. The United States no longer prides itself on exporting ministers the gospel of Jesus Christ. Instead, as Irving Kristol has put it, our missionaries live in Hollywood. Missionaries not of Christ, as John Adams had hoped, but of a dominant secular hedonistic ethos. It's an imperium with minimum of moral substance. As is true of our domestic policy, our globalist foreign policy reflects the values of a ruling pseudo-elite that is estranged not only from our country's Christian heritage, but from the inarticulate and half-forgotten residue of that heritage among ordinary Americans. That is the moral plunge of our international agenda, from exporting the gospel to exporting cash and condoms for the cooperative sanctions and bombs for the
Recalcitrant?
recalcitrant. Thank you. Is inseparable from the progressive de-Christianization of America's society and the larger European civilization which gave it birth. There's an interesting, again, to name drop Matthew Erickson. He was. I think we're going to talk about it this Thursday on over on his channel. But
Mm-hmm.
he was working through this idea of America struggling between the Anglo establishment and more of a Latin,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, spirit. Right. Let's say the
Yeah.
spiritus of America is really more
Yeah.
Latin, but the head is really still Anglo, or Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-establishment.
Mm-hmm.
In
Mm-hmm.
Canada, we say the Laurentines or Laurentide order. I think there's something to be said about that, because again, America is if we say the Latins are romantic and the
Mm-hmm.
Anglos are more pragmatic by
Mm-hmm.
nature,
Right.
the idea of great men. Not that Britain doesn't have its own history of great men. Thomas Carlyle,
Mm-hmm.
of course, waxes on quite a bit about bemoans the loss of heroism as late as the 19th century. But the great men of Britain, I think, is given a different connotation than the great men of Europe, of, let's say, a
Mm-hmm.
more Latin culture. where mythoses really are developed around them. Where
Yeah.
in Britain, it really boils down to historical fact. It's interesting. It's I don't know if you caught that thing about on Rogan with Douglas Murray, and
Mm-hmm.
he seems to have this real bugaboo about anyone attacking Winston Churchill, which I find interesting to say the least.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I was just, as you were talking, I was rummaging through my mind. Okay, who would qualify as a great man in British history? Maybe Elizabeth the First
right,
would rank in there somewhere. I wouldn't count Churchill or Cromwell in there. Um, and I'm trying to think who else you'd say that was a great man. That was a great, statesman that contributed something to his country or to the world. It's really hard to do.
well, think of it too. Right? They went through 2 world wars, where
Yeah,
Britain didn't really lose those wars. I mean,
no,
technically they lost the empire or that whatever,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But like,
sure,
what I'm saying is like they retained no great heroes really
no, yeah.
are
Lloyd
spoken about.
George, yeah, that's a name that will be immortalized in history. No,
Yeah,
of course not.
of course not. Right? You
No,
return to some kings, but that almost seems Shakespearean by this point.
no, no. And
Um,
of course there are people like Alfred the Great. Obviously the only British monarch, the only English monarch, called the Great. But again, that was a very specific context. And again, it's hard to really know him as a man, given the sort of fragmentary knowledge we have him. But he does seem to have been a pretty great guy, all in all.
right.
I'm anybody can beat Harold Bluetooth and Ivar the Boneless. Can't be all bad.
But to that point, there's no Mount Rush.
Yeah.
There's no British equivalent to Mount Rushmore.
No,
You know,
it's an interesting thought. Yeah.
so that again, it's mixed with that hyper pragmatism, that sort of naval mercantile
Hmm.
ness of Britain because of again stemming out of the city of London, and maybe the more Roman ideals. But even the Romans had great men, had exalted
Sure.
members, like
Yeah.
they
Sure.
god kings for Christ's sake. Like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
how much more exalted do you get? Um, and you have the British philosophers and certainly Shakespeare and men of
Hmm.
note, but there's no great mythos around them. There's no great. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
FDR, at least in America, you can love him or hate him, but he's a mythological figure, really,
Yeah. That's
in a
true.
more
That's
modern
true.
sense.
Yeah. Or Lincoln, you could say the same thing. I mean,
Sure.
not a big Lincoln fan, but yeah, he's a mythical, a legendary figure in a sense. In fact, there are legends about him, right? About his when he was a little kid and riding on the shovel and
Yeah.
all that stuff and all the, it's almost like making a second George Washington out of him.
Yeah.
You don't really find that in England so much.
Right. So I think there's something to be said about that, where
Hmm.
and maybe it goes back and forth because we've kind of come
Hmm.
through this hyper pragmatist,
Hmm.
ultra feminist mentality, where everything has to be
Yeah.
accounted for and very
Hmm.
very factual. And you talk to a millennial, it's like talking to Wikipedia, and now we're moving into, I think, a much more romantic age,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
will give rise, I think, the natural rise to religion. I think that's part of the reason why. There's many reasons
Hmm.
why, but I think there's religion, and I think especially with people who are dealing directly with the orthodoxy,
Hmm.
gives way to that romanticism. Even though you think of orthodoxy as very rule based,
Hmm.
men in black clothing, big beards, all that kind of
Men
stuff.
in Black.
Kinda-
That's a great name. Somebody should
sure,
use that somewhere.
yeah, they should. But orthodoxy doesn't seem to have that. If you're just looking at it,
Hmm.
it doesn't seem to have that romantic urge. But when you get into the church, it's all romantic. It's
Yeah.
It's someone said it's the most materialistic church in many ways because we have our icons, we have the
Well,
incense, like everything
we believe,
is sensual.
yeah, we believe in the sanctification of matter, and
Right.
since we also believe in the distinction between the essence and the energies, we believe that not just created hologram effects from God, but the presence of God Himself, the energies of God Himself penetrate the natural world, the material world, in ways that, you know, in some contexts you could describe as miraculous, but other contexts you just say God is present, God is with it, Bog s nami. And that's part of what it means to be Orthodox, is that we live in this divinized world. By the way, I think somewhere in there I mentioned Eric Vogelin and his New Science of Politics from 1952. Is that that's what he attributed to the decline of Christianity as a social concept and Gnosticism, because it had de-divinized the world, that the ancient pagans lived in a divinized world where every rock, tree, and river had a spirit living in it, had a God living in it, and the Christians deprived them of that, except I don't think Orthodoxy does. I think Orthodoxy maintains that divinization of the world, but through the one God rather than a whole multitude of gods.
Another thing you wrote in here, which I thought was quite good, America, despite the best intentions and emphatic Christian aspirations of the founders, has not been immune from this progression, and in some respects has been its showcase. Perhaps the most experimental thing about the American experiment was the apparently unexamined assumption that a stable Christian social order that reflected 14 centuries of Christian monarchy and church-state cooperation could be preserved and even strengthened under a political order explicitly based on then-current fantasies about the idealized civic virtues of pagan Greece and Rome. We thought we could declare every man to be his own king as well as his own pope, while under the guidance of a natural aristocracy. The inherited moral and social order would not suffer. We were wrong. The progressive degeneration over the years from the Confederal Republic to federal democracy to our current demagogic. Sorry, I need new glasses. Unitary state can be traced in the decline from Jefferson's apologetics for sancto-cultic. What is that word?
Well, then we read the sans culotte, where the French revolutionaries who didn't wear culotte, they didn't wear the knee breeches like the aristocracy. They wore long trousers to show that they were,
the original form. Some obscenities in France to the rule of King Mob under Jackson, to Lincoln's anti-constitutionalism, to Wilson's sanctimonious one-worldism, to Bush League Bolshevism of Roosevelt and Johnson, and finally to the Gramscian provocations of Bush and Gingrich.
Yeah.
So
and
that leads us.
Yeah.
That leads us to this. I mean, we often hear talk of Trump being the God Emperor. That was more prevalent maybe in 2016, but certainly calls for American Caesar or a Caesar of the West is a constant, especially in certain circles. There seems to be at least interest in the idea, and that's again harkening back to that more Latin ideal. Even just having a czar, a border czar, this czar, that czar. That's just Caesar. So obviously it's in play in both the language and I think in the spirit of it.
Yeah.
So I guess that gets us to this question, and we'll end it here, Jim. We'll round it off here because we're playing the what ifs, and then what's. If we were to substantiate, now we're starting to see Trump sort of roll back, really the last 60 odd years, at least up to Johnson. We're starting to see rollbacks. Well, again, we're starting to. Whether this,
Okay, go ahead. I have a somewhat different take, but go ahead.
Sure. Well, I'm interested in your take, but officially, this is what the announcements are, right? A lot of people are very excited. The idea of defanging. What are they saying? It's going to roll back some of the civil rights acts, defang them in some ways, delegalize certain other things, yada yada yada. Sure. Let's just assume that has something to do with it, right? If we're starting to see a rollback, do we see a rollback to pre-Lincoln? Because I think from this article and from my understanding of your argument, that's really what you need to see. I mean, we could roll it back even further, but to keep it within an American context, you almost need to roll it back to pre-Lincoln.
You'd have to, and that would be essentially restoring the original Confederal Constitution, which ain't going to happen.
Yeah, good luck.
It's not even going to go back to being a federal democracy. Right. No, I have my take on Trump is that he's not rolling back nothing. He is coming in, causing a ruckus. Basically, he is kind of an agent of disorder, which I, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of things need to be sorted, but he's sort of like coming in like a bull in a china shop, issuing a bunch of executive orders, some of which are pretty good, some of which are kind of stupid, some of which won't do anything. And that's the low hanging fruit. That's what he can do through executive action. And 100 days are up. I think he's about shot about all he can do already in terms of, you notice, for example, he's not asked for a single piece of major legislation from a Congress that has a Republican majority. Don't you think it's a bit odd? I mean, when you think about trying to roll back anything or change anything substantially, you'd say, I'm putting these tariffs in because I have a national industrial policy. I want to have a big infrastructure program. I want to, encourage manufacturing. I want to change the tax code. Blah blah blah. I'm going to get a round table together, business leaders and blah. And we're gonna make this happen. We're going to build America. Nothing of the sort. Just I'll raise some tariffs and see what the hell happens. And so I think that's sort of been his hallmark here. And I think he's basically running out of things he can do. They'll have whatever effect they have, and then we'll just sink back into the doldrums while the disruptions sort of creep through the system for better or worse.
Right.
That's what is going to happen. I don't think there'll be any rollback to anything.
That's an interesting point. That you're right. He hasn't passed anything substantial through Congress.
Hasn't even asked for it.
I don't think. Yeah, I don't think there's been anything tabled.
No.
And that could be a major indication that this is what would we call it? It's shock and awe, right? But if you're not gaining territory and seizing it and defending it, then,
exactly, good way to put it. Yeah.
Okay, but so again, we're playing what ifs. What if we're moving towards? What if America could move towards a Christian national state? I don't want to use the word Christian nationalist because that's now been polluted to such a degree that let's not even talk about it. But if we're going to move towards towards a symponesia of sorts, to contend with Russia and many other places that do have their own version of it, whether it's we could spend a whole episode criticizing it, but they're moving in that direction. Let's put it that way. So, what then, right? How does the West, specifically America, if they were going to try to respond in kind, what would that even look like? From the position of elder.
I hate to say it, but nothing good. I mean, I think the kind of Christianity we would be looking at in the best of circumstances is so degraded and so, frankly, heretical. And have you seen this lunatic he appointed to be his faith advisor at the White House? Some female pastor who thinks that God walks with her. And I mean, if that's the kind of establishment or quasi or non-established establishment of a Christian ethos in America, we're all in big trouble.
Yeah,
I mean, aside from 100 billion% support for Israel, there's nothing really of substance in any of this kind of Christianity except feel good Jesus, happy clappy. Jesus is my boyfriend, and I'm saved because I said I cried once and said a prayer, and that's basically what it amounts to. I don't see how that can be. I think the kind of Protestants we had in this country at the time of the Revolution, their jaws would drop. They would hit the floor if they saw what kind of thing that passed for Christianity in this country today. I don't see how that can be the basis for a consolidation of a civic order.
Yeah, I think any religion without tradition is not a religion. It's just
You're.
I
mean, 90% of it is controlled by a bunch of emotional chicks. Right. I mean, that's not a basis for a church, much less for a civic order based on Christianity.
Let me see if I can find it for you. I don't know if it'll play for you. You won't hear the volume, but
is this that faith?
Did you see
advisor?
Mr. Westford, friend of the show? Let me see if I can find it. Posted out a banger. It was a meme that said, "Oh, I should have it here. Hang on." A meme that said, "POV when you tell a Protestant." I don't have it here, unfortunately. When you tell a Protestant woman that they can't start their own church and and start a podcast, and it's just a woman
Yeah.
which is a woman wailing, one of these like
Yeah. Yeah.
yell-ins that was
Yeah.
I
Now,
hate
now, now,
you.
now, now, there are some. You've got this. What's the name? Adrian Vermeule and people like this. What they call the integralists, Catholic integralists, who think that because just like you have some young men coming into Orthodoxy now, you have some people going into traditional Catholicism. That somehow we will get a consolidation of a Roman Catholic anchor to our social order. How they manage to do that with what the kind of revolution going on in their church with Pope Francis and whoever succeeds him, I don't know. But there are people thinking along those lines. I don't think that's going to go anywhere either. But time will tell.
Yeah, well,
And then you could have your Latin social order then with we'll find our own American Francisco Franco or somebody like that.
who I just saw. I don't want to keep you too late here, Jim, but I just saw someone post or the speculation of the front runner. I don't know this guy's name for the new pope because he was seen wearing the hat of the old pope.
It was Cardinal Parolin.
Yeah,
He was wearing it. Yeah.
And there's great speculation.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know the story. Apparently, he sold out some Chinese Catholics. I don't know stuff. I don't keep abreast of this thing. To me, it's the Vatican has so many other things to work out that sure, it's like people getting excited or hating on Carney. I'm like, look, man, it was obviously always going to be Carney.
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
and oh, by the way, I woke up this morning to announcements out of Canada that Carney wants to put a equity tax on unrealized housing equity. So basically,
What?
Yeah. So basically, if you paid off your mortgage, he's gonna present a new tax to equalize unrealized gains.
In other words, so if you paid off your house and you don't sell it, but the value of the house has increased, you pay tax on the increased value of the house.
Bingo.
And people voted for this guy.
Hey, well, look, it was unrealized gains.
Democracy.
Unrealized gains. It's gonna move through the system. I think he's going to start in housing and get it all the way to investments. This is what this is what Kamala and co.
Well, and Janet Yellen wanted to do that here in this country too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, back to the Pope and the conclave. I mean, we'll be watching for the black smoke or the white smoke. I'm watching for the rainbow smoke when it comes out of the chimney.
There's the clip, Buck. That's the clip. Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames and messieurs, thank you for stopping by. We're live here every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Go buy Jim's book, I Try to Warn You, his collected works. Of course, go support this show any way you can. Like, subscribe, share, let the people know where to find us. People on Substack and people on Spotify. I have been tardy. I have been letting things build up. I have not. There you go. Got
Actually, this book really goes with this shirt.
It really does.
It does look. I mean, look at that. That's really something. I didn't even plan it that way.
Well,
this is gonna be my book shirt now.
So he says, folks. I'm not. I would never call Jim a liar to his face. No. But anyways, go get yourself a book. Find a way to support the show any way you can. I've been tardy on putting these things up on Spotify and other places. That's on me. I will rectify that problem this week. And more episodes will be released and out in the ether, and please go consume them and let people consume them as well. I appreciate each and every one of you.